Welcome, everyone, to the fourth episode of Season 2 of our webinar series, Music and Healing. I'm Elisa Magajon, Interim Director of Community and Learning at Houston Grand Opera.
And I am Houston Grand Opera's Artistic and Music Director, Patrick Summers. So nice to see you all. Alyssa and I are delighted to welcome you to Season 2 of our Music and Healing series, where we have explored how music and singing are being used in a variety of ways to help heal the mind, body, and spirit. This series is part of Houston Grand Opera's Seeking the Human Spirit initiative, a 6-year multidisciplinary initiative designed to highlight the universal spiritual themes raised in opera and classical music, and to expand and deepen Houstonians' connections to opera and to art.
In case you guys missed any of our previous episodes or our last season, you can always go back to YouTube, to HGO's channel, and take a look at those. We encourage you all to subscribe and, of course, share out our channel to anyone you think might be interested.
In this episode, we're going to explore how social, emotional learning can be fostered through music. Our first guest today is at the intersection of social emotional learning, and she is Dr. Robin Stern, Associate Director for the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence and Associate Research Scientist at the Child Study Center at Yale. She is a licensed psychoanalyst with 30 years of experience treating individuals, couples, and families. Robin, Dr. Stern, I will say, is the co-developer of Ruler, an acronym for the 5 key emotional skills of recognizing, understanding, labeling, expressing, and regulating emotions. This is an evidence-based approach to social and emotional learning that has been adopted by over 1,500 public, charter, and private preschool to high schools across the United States and in other countries. Robin, thank you so much, Dr. Stern, for joining us. We're really looking forward to diving in and discovering more about this. Would you take a moment and explain to our audience a little bit about social emotional learning and more about the acronym RULER? It's fascinating.
So I definitely will. First, let me say, please call me Robin, and I'm delighted to be here. I'm very excited, and I am a music lover and have been involved in an incredible initiative bringing emotions and music together, which I will tell you about later on. And also to let you know that the Ruler approach is now in over 3,000 schools.
Oh, wow. I had the wrong number.
The country. Well, I think that you read copy from our from an older place, and we've expanded just enormously over the last number of years, and especially through the pandemic, people are understanding the urgency to acquire these skills and bring them into their schools in a systemic way. So what is social and emotional learning? Well, first of all, it's an integral part of a holistic education for every child. And it's a process. I'm actually going to read the definition from the CASEL website. The CASEL website, CASEL is the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, the first organization founded to bring together and to give a frame to all the programs bringing this work to schools. And it's the process through which young people and adults acquire and apply knowledge, skills, and attitudes to develop healthy identities, manage emotions, achieve personal and collective goals, feel and show empathy for others, and to establish a supportive and to establish and maintain a supportive relationships and make responsible and caring decisions. So that's pretty terrific, right? Like a set of skills that really helps you achieve well-being, the ability to perform well, to make good relationships, to make sound decisions. And we are an evidence-based program with high regard under the CASEL framework.
Please go on, Dr.
Oh, Patrick, ask me the question.
Well, I of course, my first curiosity is what kind of role music can play in that social emotional learning, but we'll get there. I didn't want to interrupt.
So the Ruler approach, and note that we call it an approach, not a program, because it is not. The Ruler approach is a mindset and attitudes about emotions mattering. Emotions deserve a seat at the table, and they matter for 5 key areas. Emotions matter for our ability to pay attention and to focus, to learn. They matter for our ability to make decisions and good judgments, for our relationships. Think about it, it just makes sense. Emotions are key to having strong, positive relationships. Emotions matter for our ability to maintain mental and physical well-being and the everyday of it. Emotions matter in dealing with frustrations and disappointments every single day, negotiating what our days are like, and for creativity. So knowing that emotions matter is what we mean by having an emotions mindset. And then being a curious observer of our own emotions and other people's emotions. We call that being an emotion scientist. Having curiosity as opposed to judgment when you feel something or when somebody tells you, I feel such and such. Being the learner, the listener, and not the knower and the teller. Being open as opposed to closed to new information, to what someone's saying. And then there are the skills of emotional intelligence that we use the acronym RULER to define and to describe. And each skill is about yourself and other people. So recognizing emotions in yourself and other people, understanding the causes and the consequences of why you feel the way you feel, and for others as well. Labeling your emotions. Think about that. If we can't label our emotions, we can't communicate in a way that lets other people know what we're really feeling. You know, it's a basic human need to be seen and understood. So the better we can understand, recognize, and label our emotions, the more accurately we can communicate our needs. And then there's the action part of RULER, expressing and regulating. So I just described RUL, the experiencing part of emotional intelligence, and now E and R, the action part, expressing your emotions at the right time in the right way to the right crowd or the right person, and regulating emotions, which is our master skill. The ability to self-regulate and to co-regulate, manage your own emotions, and to help others manage theirs. So
So it
that's
sounds like
what we call our
sounds like social emotional learning from this approach is is not about impulse control so much as it is really an honest look at oneself and an honest look at emotions, right?
That's exactly
It's
right. It's really understanding what you're feeling and deciding whether or not you want to stay in that place or you want to shift to another place. So sometimes it's about tamping it down. Sometimes it's about bringing yourself back to center by taking a deep breath and managing your emotions. Other times it's about saying, you know what, I'm sad today because a lot of sad things have happened and I don't need to shift to another place. I'm just going to be with that feeling, accepting what you feel. And sometimes it's about needing to manage your joy, you know, needing to elevate yourself because you want to be in a great mood and you want to bring joy to the moment. And maybe you walked into the room not feeling that way. So it can be about managing down, lifting up, and staying where you are.
fascinating. One of the, I mean, all of the RULER acronyms, that's all very interesting to me. I want to dig a little further into labeling, because what I have found in a professional situation or leading an arts organization, let's say,
Yeah.
that many times emotions are mislabeled. Someone will say they're angry when they're actually just nervous, or they're hurt, or
Yes.
performance nerves inform a lot of emotions in an arts company, and often the labeling is simply they've just not identified what emotion they're actually feeling. And I'd love for you to dig into that a little more.
Sure. So let me ask you a question then. What's the impact of that? What's the difference for you between somebody saying, Patrick, I'm angry about that, or Patrick, I'm disappointed about that? How does that impact you? What does that lead you to do?
Well, as a leader, I can respond to the emotion that's real, but I
Mhm.
I can't respond to the ghost or to the mislabeled thing. I can't really go anywhere with that. So
Yes.
it harms my ability to help or to lead if it's mislabeled.
Yes. And so we have, yes, exactly. We have an expression, behavior doesn't equal emotion. So
Interesting.
somebody, just as you're saying, may come stomping onto the stage, looks angry, but actually is feeling ashamed or frustrated or disappointed in something, right?
Interesting.
Or someone sitting and looking like they're devolving into themselves and looks sad, but maybe that's your sad, but that person's angry. And to your point, how do you talk to that person about what they're feeling when you don't know what they're feeling? So we say wisdom is to ask. You never really know how someone is feeling until you ask them. And if you don't have the labels, then you can't tell. So if you want to express to somebody about what you're feeling, and all you can say is, I'm upset, it's not really going to give them a lot of information,
No.
right? Other
Some
than,
people,
go ahead.
oh, sorry.
No,
Some people get confused, I think, when it comes to SEL and music, thinking that it's somehow similar to music therapy. Are there distinctions between the two?
absolutely. So music is healing. Music is connecting. Music can lift you. Music can um, sadden you. And so those are connecting points. But social and emotional learning, the process of using your skills towards a goal, is very different than listening to music. Right?
Yeah.
Listening to music maybe want something, maybe a strategy that you use to get to your goal. It may be a strategy that you've identified through being aware of what works for you, through accumulating a bunch of strategies that you can use at any moment that can
Mm,
help you to shift your mood. But music is not that skill. Music is a vehicle for you.
interesting. How does SEL show up successfully in the classroom? So how do you measure? You say you're evidence based. What does it look like in a music classroom?
Let me take that from good question, first of all, but let me take it from a different perspective,
Please.
or through a different lens. One of the things that brought me to this program, to the ruler approach, I used to work at Columbia University. I met Mark Brackett, who was running the Yale at the time, the laboratory for social and health, behavior, and emotion, which
Okay.
later became our center. We met at a mindfulness retreat just coincidentally, and I was attracted to his program because he talked about adults first. And so how does it show up in the classroom? Hopefully with the adult first. So when we go into a school to bring our systemic approach to the classroom, we don't start at the classroom. We actually start at the district level. And then we invite and encourage superintendents or district leaders to bring in teams, to identify teams at the individual schools. And so then the schools send what we call implementation teams to our trainings, which, as I said earlier on, have just grown over the last number of years, the numbers of trainings that we've offered, the number of people asking for our trainings. So those implementation teams go back from our train the trainer experience, and they train their schools. And so here we are with the adults first. So it's the adults training the adults. And then the adults are asked to really digest and to practice, to live the skills of emotional intelligence, to live the approach, to really integrate the mindset of emotions matter and ask the questions that the emotion scientists would ask and use the skills and the tools. We have 4 tools that we call the anchor tools. Most notable among them, our signature tool is the mood meter, where you can capture your own emotions. You can plot your own emotions on a visual space. And I don't know if anybody in your studio can pull up Google Mood Meter and pull it up for your audience, but it would be really valuable to do that. So it's the adults first. And like using the mood meter or other anchor tools in conversations, the adults begin to shift the culture. So that by the time students are having those lessons in the classroom, where through literature, through what is displayed in the classroom, through the teacher asking questions rather than just pushing out knowledge. Students are learning the skills of emotional intelligence.
It's wonderful. And teachers,
It is.
I would assume that then you are training teachers to be really mindful listeners of their students. I presume that that's the training, right?
Yes. So the training is to be a mindful listener of yourself and then of others, right?
Yeah.
To notice where you're confusing jealousy and envy and label your emotions accurately, or where you're confusing anxiety and pressure and label your emotions accurately, and then be able to model that for your children and for your students. And importantly, before all of that, giving yourself the permission to feel, or the ground for all of that is the permission to feel, which is also the name of a book Mark Brackett wrote.
Oh, really?
It's really an important concept. It's a wonderful book and an important concept, because think about it. If you don't give yourself the permission to feel and you don't talk about your feelings, you can't possibly model that for children. You can't possibly ask that of children if they've never seen it in you. Because your children, we say this to families, we say this to teachers, your children are watching you. And they're going to be doing what you're doing.
What is the name of the book again? So we can put it in the chat line for people.
Permission to Feel.
Permission to Feel. Great title. We see SEL methodically used in schools through various frameworks that are implemented with training teachers.
Yes.
I'll go to the next little question though, because I think it's so related. What are some simple tools that we can all use to help us as adults hone our SEL skills?
I would recommend looking for the mood meter online. I would recommend spending time checking in with yourself and giving yourself an education, whether it's Googling feeling words online or talking to people about adding feeling vocabulary words, just building your self-awareness. I'd recommend a mindful activity that helps you to know when to listen to the cues of your body and begin to explain to yourself and build mental models about when you are feeling pleasant or feeling unpleasant, and tracking those patterns throughout the week. What are the days and hours of the days you feel most pleasant? If it turns out that every Monday morning at 11 you feel unpleasant, well, you might want to check out what you're doing at that time and don't do it anymore. And so building your own toolkit for regulating your emotions and doing what you can to build those skills, and to consider that your emotions are impacted by all the areas that I explained earlier, and also impact people all the time. People are catching your feelings. Emotions are contagious. Emotions are information.
It's fantastic. I know that our audience here today is going to have a lot of questions for you. I have a whole lot more questions. It's been just wonderful chatting with you, Robin, and we'll look forward.
Thank you. You too. I look forward to more time to talk to you about music and wonderful synergy between the two. And people are free and welcome to email me. I'd love to hear from anyone who's been listening to this and like to know more information. And please share my email with the audience. I'll be happy to answer anything that comes my way.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. It was
Thank you so much.
Enlightening and generous interview. Thank you, Robin. We'd like next to introduce our guest, who is the Dean of Instruction at YES Prep Northside Secondary, Sabria Gibson. Sabria, welcome. Sabria is a school campus administrator whose passion for balance, advocacy, and student success has driven her career in education. She has taught in both traditional and non-traditional settings and continues to work to ensure all students receive a quality education regardless of color and/or socioeconomic status. As a leader, Sabria works to empower the teachers she supports to cultivate spaces within schools that not only serve the students well, but also the teachers. She knows that creating these environments allows room for relationship building and promotes healthy socio-emotional practices. Welcome, Sabria. It sounds like you have a lot of synergy with what Dr. Stern was talking about.
Yes. I was over here taking notes. Hi,
Oh,
Patrick. Thank you for having me.
so happy you're here. Could you tell us a little bit about your background and what brought you to education as a profession?
Yes, sure. I always tell people that what brought me into education was God. God called me into education. Initially, when I was in college at Tuskegee University, I had no desire to become a teacher. I actually wanted to be a dentist. After shadowing a couple of dentists time passed, I realized that I wasn't as passionate about dentistry as I thought I would be. And so I decided not to pursue that anymore, which was great because I was identifying what I really didn't want to do, but I was in limbo because I wasn't exactly sure which direction that I wanted to go in. A friend mentioned teaching to me and told me about a teaching certification program in New Orleans, which is how I ended up teaching in schools in New Orleans. I applied to the program and got accepted. So for many years, I was a science teacher in New Orleans classrooms, being able to intertwine with the community and learn the needs of the community. Towards the end of my stay in New Orleans, I helped to found a school in the Juvenile Justice Center, which to some might be known as a detention center, and did a lot of work there. After receiving my Master's of Educational Leadership in 2018 from Columbia University, I moved to Houston to take on the leadership role, which is what I do now as Dean of Instruction at YES Prep Northside.
Wonderful. I'm eager to dig into the some of your experiences. You've had so many extraordinary experiences. One of our most impactful programs at HGOCO was actually with the Juvenile Detention Center here downtown, but we will talk about that. You worked, I believe, as a teacher, as you said, in a detention center, and have worked in a lot of underserved communities since then. Sabria, what are some of the added traumas and stressors that students in these environments are dealing with that can affect their progress in school, and how do you deal with that?
So, Patrick, I think that's an amazing question. A lot of times, students in these communities are dealing with survival. They are trying to simply survive. So, things that we may take for granted, like I ate this evening, or my children have a bedtime, I put my kids to bed. The children don't have to worry about helping to pay bills. These are things that sometimes our students have to grapple with and support their families with. So, for example, a student may be in school during first period and they're asleep in class. A teacher who does not have any context on this student, or from the outside, it may look like this child is not engaged. They don't want to learn. They're not here for school. When in all honesty, you may not know that this child was watching their siblings all night while their parent was working. In terms of the detention center, what I saw a lot of, these students were awaiting adjudication, meaning they were awaiting trial. So students were required to come into school, sit down, and perform academically, while in the back of their mind, they may be thinking about how they're facing 5 years in prison, 15 years, 20 years in prison. Some of these students are 15 years old. So they're trying to process all of these things. Sometimes they are the main caretaker and provider for their families. So there's just all these different nuances that sometimes we're not privy to or aware of. And those are added in those communities. So if you're in a classroom and you have all these things in your mind, it can be hard to prioritize your education, because in that moment you are prioritizing survival.
Of course.
We've seen even with the pandemic that it's been hard for adults to come into spaces and direct their energy into, like, let me focus on work. They are also impacted by all of the external factors that are going on. So if that is a challenge for an adult, it is definitely a challenge for a child.
Of course. How can dealing with these traumas of students impact educators like you? Because the problem is too large for any one person to solve. What sources or what resources are available to you, and what resources are still needed?
Okay. Another great question. Let's start with the piece of how it impacts educators.
Yeah.
I want to start, before I dive into that question, I want to start with saying that a lot of times educators are coming into spaces with their own traumas, their own things that they're grappling with or healing from or not healing from in their own life. So you're stepping into a space with your own stuff. You are required to come into this space if you are a teacher or an educator with a heart for the work, you are going to set your things aside and bring your whole self for students. You love your students, you feel responsible for them. So sitting back and watching children navigate these spaces that sometimes the educator has no awareness of, they may not have lived that life, so they cannot fully understand the weight of it. You're still trying to help this child navigate this space while prioritizing academics and knowing that you have to have a certain amount of test scores for the school to still get funding. And you're just thinking about all these different things that come into play. So you want to do your job as an educator and ensure that students are learning, and you have to help children navigate the traumas that they're bringing to the classroom. A lot of times educators don't have the training to deal with their own emotions, let alone the emotions of children. We just do our best to navigate that space. And sometimes it looks like abandoning your own trauma, your own issues to be there for the child. But we have to keep in mind that we cannot pour from an empty cup. So I would like to see, to your point of resources that are needed, I would like to see more resources targeted at supporting educators deal with their own traumas and emotions. And to Robin's point during her segment of teaching adults how to apply these emotional tools so that students can watch them model that and apply it to their own lives. I can say things are available that I'm not sure if everybody is aware of. Our district does offer 3 to 5 free therapeutic sessions for mental health purposes. Also, insurance a lot of times will cover some of the costs if people want to go ahead and get into therapy. So those are some of the resources that are available.
Good. In your experience, Sabria, how does social emotional learning serve as an impactful tool for students, teachers, and families?
Socio-emotional learning allows individuals, students, teachers, and families to learn how to identify the emotions that are rising up with them. A lot of times, especially with children, you feel a thing and you react to the thing that you're feeling, but you don't really know what that thing is or what is causing you to feel that way.
Labeling.
And so
there we are again.
I'm sorry?
Labeling. There we are
exactly,
again.
Labeling the emotion, but not becoming attached to it, of course. And so that leads me to the second piece of, now that you've identified the emotion that is rising up within you, you are able to communicate that emotion to somebody else. It gives students, especially, the language to communicate to adults, to their families, what is going on with inside of them, so that we don't see a child acting out in the classroom and just automatically assume that take it personal, where it's, oh, you're trying to ruin my class or ruin the lesson. But instead, the child is in a better space to take those breaths, take those mindfulness moments, and be able to communicate, this is how I'm feeling, and I think that I'm feeling this way because. So it's definitely impactful in that way. It's impactful for families in the sense that when you teach children these things in schools, it is imperative that families are brought into that learning. Because if I'm learning this toolkit of managing my emotions, regulating and talking my emotions in this space, and then I am going home to a family that does not know how to apply this, I'm doing this at school, but I'm losing it over the weekend and during breaks because I'm not consistently practicing this, and my family does not know how.
I'm going to ask probably a very naive question, but the effect of the pandemic on your work in particular, it must have magnified these issues 1,000-fold. But could you talk a little bit about being an educator in the pandemic? I don't want to re-traumatize anyone, but
it's all good, Patrick. I'm in it every day. This has been the toughest year in education that I've ever experienced.
Of course.
The absolute toughest. I think what the pandemic is bringing up is it's making the adults in the building look at the need for themselves and what they need. It is stretching people thin, and we have been in go mode since the pandemic began, and we haven't had a chance to catch a breath. Schools are also essential workers. Like, educators are essential workers. These people are on the front line supporting people's children. And sometimes the support is not there to ensure that we can continue to do this in a way that not only prioritizes the health and well-being of our students, but the health and well-being of our educators so that they can pour into our students.
We feel for you. Sabria, can you talk about the ways that music has been and can be more, can be a healer in the classroom, especially in our underserved communities?
Sure. Music is just healing. I think it can have the power to heal anybody. There's so many properties of healing interwoven within music. I want to point out that in these underserved communities, as we term them, the cultures that are within them usually are heavily tied to music and food. So when you create space for music in the classroom, it kind of connects to children on a spiritual level because it is a part of their culture. Also, it gives students a space to shut out external factors that may not be the most positive and to mentally redirect their energy into a space that feels calming, into a space that feels safe so that they can thrive in the classroom.
Yeah, these using music as a healing tool, as a teaching tool, as using the art of opera, which is a musical storytelling tool. This has been a really important part of our work at HGO for a long time now, especially in the last decade. And it's always so empowering to hear from an educator like you that some of the work we're doing has impact because you're using it and you believe in it. It's been just really lovely talking with you, Sabria. And I know that our guests are going to have a lot of questions for your work, but congratulations on the great work that you're doing in very tough times.
Thank you so much, Patrick.
We'll see you shortly. Our final guest today is Scott Edgar, Dr. Scott. He has dedicated his career to highlighting the potential music education and educators have to build life skills students will utilize long after they leave the classroom, just what I was discussing with Sabria. As a notable authority on music education and social emotional learning, Dr. Edgar has emerged as a leading researcher, best-selling author, and internationally sought-after clinician on the subject. He is the author of Music Education and Social Emotional Learning, The Heart of Teaching Music. He is associate professor of music, chair of the Department of Music, and director of bands at Lake Forest College. Sounds like a very, very busy man, and serves as director of practice and research for the Center for Arts, Education, and Social Emotional Learning. Scott, so wonderful to have you here today. Your work is really extraordinary, and I admire music educators so much. Tell us a bit about your background as a musician and educator, and particularly what sparked your interest in SEL.
Patrick, first, thank you so much for having me join you today. Some might say it's in my DNA. Both my parents are social workers, so it was commonplace for me to come home after a day of school and my parents prioritizing discussions about our mental well-being right along with, how was math class, how was band, how was choir. That was part of what we talked about. If we needed a mental health day, often that was just as important as if I had a fever. Mental health is physical health. Yeah. So from there, I was a band director in Dayton, Ohio for 7 years of my life. And I went to University of Michigan. When I was a band director in Dayton, a lot of my students would come to me with the weight of the world on their shoulders. And they asked me to wear a hat that didn't feel comfortable. They said, how can you help me navigate these challenges? And the answer is all of my preparation up until that point was to be a music educator. I had to rely on humanity to help me navigate those conversations. Mm-hmm. But when I went to University of Michigan to get my doctorate, I discovered the construct of SEL. And it was like, okay, where have you been all of my life? And how can I start to think about what are those ties explicitly to music? And since then, I've dedicated the last 11 years of my life to translating some of the great work that you heard from Robin and Sabria to what it looks like for our music teachers on a daily basis to embed this into the musical process, because music gives us the greatest head start we could ever want. It's never something that we say, okay, we're going to do music, stop. We're going to start to address plus SEL now, music, music, music. It's how do we embed social and emotional learning into everything we do in our classroom?
That's right. Yeah. And music, by being both a science and an art, it's uniquely poised to do that for students, I think. Now, before we dive too far, Scott, I believe there's a video that you have to share with the audience. And what is this that we're going to see?
So this is a product that we were able to create with the help of the VH1 Save the Music folks to tie these connections between social and emotional learning and music education together, hitting
Wonderful.
at the some of these big themes. So, when we talk about how does this work, I think this 2-minute video is going to hit it out of the park.
Wonderful.
Today's current events are having a big impact on our students. Concentrating on learning is getting harder and harder. And being away from school, friends, and teachers has made it even more challenging. As music educators, we are uniquely suited to see where our students need the most support and to help. Music education can play a critical role in social and emotional learning, or SEL. SEL is an approach that teachers can use to spot challenges and create powerful experiences that encourage self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. Skills every student needs right now. Musicians are goal setters. We have high standards for musicianship and ourselves. There are 3 goals of SEL that are perfect fit for us. Our focus can build a stronger sense of identity. Learning to play music along with others builds a community of belonging. The music classroom is a space where every student's agency can be practiced and embraced. When music and SEL work together, students thrive. They learn how to apply the discipline we have in music to other areas in their lives, setting goals and achieving them. When you embed SEL into your music classroom, you also help students express their emotions in constructive ways, in tune with each other. Students learn to become resilient, navigate social situations better, and to advocate for themselves and others. They learn empathy. SEL works for student empowerment, and there has never been a better time to put it into action. Let us help you embed SEL into your music classroom. Go to artsedsel.org or savethemusic.org to learn more. Putting SEL center stage.
Oh, Scott, that's fantastic. A book that I wrote a few years ago called The Spirit of This Place is largely about the renewed need for arts education and why the world needs art education. But this video you're right, it hits it out of the park. How do you define SEL, and what does it look like in your music classroom?
Yeah, powerful question, because every single teacher, I would want to have a different answer for that, because
Right.
there's not a cut and paste answer for what social and emotional learning needs to look like. So when you ask that question of me, my answer is connection. Social and emotional learning provides me a tool to be able to use music as a portal, as a modality, to be able to connect to my students in a new and deeper way. And when I start to look at how do I connect, well, then that takes me to the next level past that, which is the most important commodity that we have in schools, which is relationships. When we prioritize connection and relationships, this idea of identity, belonging, and agency, which are our 3 pillars of social and emotional learning, are set front and center. And when we start to look at what this looks like, it needs to start with safety. So this idea of belonging, our classrooms need to be a place that is safe for conversation, for vulnerability. You mentioned when you were talking with Robin, first off, you have an artist who comes on stage with these strong emotions. There's no room to hide in music. Vulnerability is mandated. You have to be there front and center. But so much of what we tell our students is, okay, here are skills to understand how you can be more resilient, how you can help with stage fright, things like that. But there's so many things that we also tell our students just to leave at the door. And the answer is no. Those things are going to come in the door whether we like it or not. SEL gives us a space through the musical process to help us make sense of what that looks like and how to put that into space that it's going to have a musical outlet.
And you're talking not just about individual music lessons, but ensembles. You're talking
100%.
about the ensemble space. Yeah,
100%. Because music is social, music is emotional. We do music as community. And we know that if I don't trust the people who I'm making music with, it's not going to be very good. So, people often come and say, hey, Scott, what's an outcome of SEL in the music classroom? And the best answer that I can give is students who feel comfortable making great music, and the music gets better. When we are really embracing this, everything gets better.
It's so important. I mean, I think that in a way, music may not have directly saved any individual life, maybe, who knows, but everything that is required of music is exactly what is needed to save that life. It's such vital part of the educational process. And music educators especially, they become much more than teachers to their students. They often serve, as you already alluded to, you as makeshift counselors and mentors. How can teachers be there for their students without sacrificing their own needs? Sabria touched on this too.
Yeah, and as did Robin, so many of our teachers are just facing a supreme sense of burnout right now.
Of course.
I would call it empathy fatigue, that the weight of all of our students' challenges we put on our shoulders. And so the answer is we're not counselors. We're not therapists. We went to school to be educators. So that's what really attracted me to SEL. This is a skill-based approach that we can implement in our music classroom, that we're not counselors. I think we all have moments in our life that, when we said, I need help, who do I go to? Well, I go to the people who I trust. And who do I trust? Well, our music teachers often. For those of us who engage and have an identity as a music student, we go to our music teachers. Music teachers see their students more than any other teacher in the school. That developmental relationship over years after years after years is going to build that trusting environment. But those deep conversations, to me, that's good humaning. That's just being a trusted adult in the moment. Social and emotional learning are some strategies that we can start to implement, own, adapt in our classrooms so that our students can skill build in a way that's organic, that they have agency over, so that we're able to do this as a whole class community.
That does save lives. There's no question about that. In what ways, Scott, have you seen SEL improve the lives of students and their academic pursuits, or even just their artistic output? Talk a bit about that.
Yeah, the answer is both, and let me just kind of go back and talk a little bit about how I've seen it help teachers. When teachers are able to reground in that moral compass of why we do what we do, instead of mired in the weeds of the what, the last 2 years, we've all had to discover how to do our jobs in a way that, to be frank, it has no business being done over Zoom. So when we start to pull back from that and reground in our why, well, we found that our teachers and students alike realize that, maybe it's not the technique that's the most important thing right now. Maybe it's coming together and reminding ourselves why we love making music together. And the technique's going to come back. One of my mantras that I use right now, Patrick, is needs before notes. And we need to work our way through our needs to get back to a meaningful space of notes. The outcomes when this is done intentionally, you mentioned this right at the top of our time today, that this can't be something that we say we already do this. Social and emotional learning needs to be intentionally embedded into the musical process. And when we do this, we see our students' sense of efficacy go up. We see their confidence go up. We see their ability to have trusting relationships with the people to their left and their right in our ensembles go up. We see their ability and comfort to be vulnerable go up. We see their emotional vocabulary go up. All key outcomes that we look for from a social and emotional learning approach.
and you see these things because you've also been trained to see them. That's such an important part of this. I know that in a professional company, if we have a powerful why, we can deal with just about any what or where or any of those other questions. But I'm so touched and moved and inspired that you brought up the why, because that's the most important thing for us. How can professional companies incorporate SEL for both artists and most especially our audiences?
Yeah, two different thoughts on this one. For the artists, I think oftentimes we look at the stage and we think, oh, they're pros. They don't have emotions. They put emotional displacement and they just come out. They got this in the bag. They're pros.
Oh,
Part of it's vulnerability and saying, no, we don't. This is something that we encounter too. So you're role models. You're out there on the stage. This is the tip of the iceberg. So when we look at students as they're coming through a musical progression of building their musical skill, they need to see people who are at the top of their game saying, I deal with these things too. These are the challenges that I have. Here are some techniques over going a few more times around the sun that I've learned that worked for me. Let's experiment how they work for you. Because again, SEL is not a cut and paste. It needs to be something that's adapted. One of the things that I just want to, I don't want to miss the opportunity, Patrick, to say that Snowy Day hit it out of the park. And when I saw Snowy Day, I saw two things. I saw something that was culturally relevant. And I think that that's one of the biggest challenges when we look at professional artists. There's 6 degrees of separation. It's like they're there and I'm over here doing this. And, I'm never going to get there. Snowy Day provided a translation point. It provided a space for us to say, I can see myself in opera. That's a book that we've read, Nathan, countless times. Yeah. But how do we do this intentionally? Well, we need to look at Snowy Day and draw out those SEL themes. So let's look at some of the things that Peter could have experienced in Snowy Day. So, he had to navigate disappointment, right? He couldn't play with the big kids. His snowball melted in his pocket. He had to negotiate refusal. What's an audition process? Negotiating refusal. So do we find something in an objective space, a story, an opera that everyone can rally around and say, I see myself in this character. Here are skills that this character put front and center. How can that resonate with my life? How can I connect with that?
Oh, thank you. Thank you for that. For our guests here today, The Snowy Day was a commissioned opera by Houston Grand Opera that we premiered just this past December. A new opera by the young American composer Joel Thompson and a librettist Andrea Davis Pinkney, based on Ezra Jack Keats' famous, I think 1962 or 3 children's book. And it's a very, very special work in the history of this company. And we're thrilled to have done it. And we will be thrilled to do it again when it comes back around. But thank you for mentioning it. How, Scott, can SEL provide a space for musicians, audiences, and students to come together and discuss problematic themes in opera while we preserve some of our beloved repertoire? Because a lot of this repertoire is problematic.
Patrick, I think the first thing is that I would applaud you for admitting it. I think oftentimes we ignore the problematic past and we don't provide a space for conversation. I think the challenge here comes into that space of belonging in social and emotional learning. How can people see themselves in opera? And if we have some of these things that are largely based on dated stereotypes that can be very, very offensive, well, then not only are we not going to have a space of belonging for those people to say, I belong in this art form, I belong in a space where I want to enjoy this art form, we're not going to be able to get to that point because we've said that art is a one-way arrow. Art is something that we do to the audience instead of art is something that we do with the audience. When we start to look at this idea of belonging, it opens up a dialogue for us to say, this is what was in the original Puccini opera. Does it have a space on the stage today? How does this resonate with today's audience? Where are ways that we can think about a dialogue? What conversations can this start? So this is a way that, social and emotional learning by itself isn't going to do anything, but social and emotional learning is a construct in the hearts of people who want to have a dialogue around bringing more people to an art form that can start to have a dialogue, I think is a powerful space for us to start.
Absolutely. I mean, you mentioned Puccini. I mean, I can think of 3 Puccini operas that really behoove us to have conversations around what the world was like when they were written. Tosca, Turandot, Madama Butterfly. Um, can we see the cultural problems with these pieces now, and can we see that as growth on our part, that we're in a different world now, but the world was like this earlier? I mean, I think it's a very very important to have a forum for those conversations, isn't it?
100%.
How do you do that in your teaching? What forum do you use? Do you use part of your, like, if you have a 50-minute band practice, do you use part of it to discuss those sorts of things?
Great question. And the gist of it is we have to have a willingness to pull the thread. So yesterday in class, the students wanted to take numerous conversations in different directions. And I went in every direction that they went, and I got through 10% of my agenda. My lesson plan might as well have just been thrown out the window. And in the end, I just looked at the students and I was like, we're vulnerable. We don't need to be the wizard behind the curtain. And we say, you know what? I didn't get to the content that I wanted to get to, but we had a meaningful conversation about what it looks like to approach programming in a wind band setting with more intentional diversity, equity, and inclusion. And in the end, we were able to have a space that set us up that the content is going to be able to accelerate next class, because we were able to navigate so many of the conversations that were in people's hearts.
Of course. Oh, Sabria, I'm glad you got back on. We thought we'd lost you. Glad you're back.
Yeah, I had to join from my phone, so I'm on my phone. Hopefully it hangs on.
Okay. Dr. Stern, Robin,
Thank you.
You were the first guest, and I would love to hear some of your reactions to what you've heard today. You'll have a very interesting perspective on some of the things that have been brought up.
Well, so I'm just so appreciative of it's a privilege to be here with these other experts, Scott and Sabria, with you. Sabria, just want to share with you that I have so many resources from the Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, where we worked very hard to meet teachers where they were and are still, because of the 3 years of uncertainty and unpredictability, and 2 years, but 3 winters. So I'd be happy to connect with you and share with you. And Scott, I loved the video, and I just was so delighted and inspired to hear of your work, and just wanted to share with you. This is even better than calling you after the fact, because I just really want to connect with you, that I've been involved in an organization called Seaside for many years as a consultant. And Seaside was started by singer-songwriter Susan Collins and Andy Kaplow and their son Tucker Murray, who is himself a singer-songwriter, to bring together student songs to help students write their own songs to express what they were feeling at times in their life when they were, in fact, desperate, or in fact had no other way of healing except through song, through the ways in which you talked about it, through really being in touch with what they were feeling and then being able to give voice to it through music, and being able to then write and work with Susan Collins to write the music that would express their feelings as well. And I just was such an honor for me at that time, and still working with Tucker Murray, who has written a lot of songs that really bear, all of the songs are emotional songs. And he was very inspired by his own emotional life, and also the emotions that he sees and hears about from his friends. So when you asked the question earlier, can music save lives? I believe, yes, it certainly saves emotional lives and makes them better.
Yeah, absolutely. I wonder, Robin, Scott, Sabria, Sabria touched on this really wonderfully, I think, but what are the resources that are still needed? You've obviously all made a lot of progress in incorporating SEL into your work, but what still needs to be done? Scott, maybe you want to touch on that. I'd love to hear from all of you.
Yeah, Patrick, I'll just give you a quick snapshot of where we're going. We are really taking a hard look at what social and emotional learning can look like in varied contexts across the country and how it needs to be organically adapted, how this can be embedded into professional learning communities where our teachers are having an ownership of this process, an empowerment over what this looks like in their space, following that up with determining what type of reflection guides really going to help them get to a space of being able to see themselves in SEL. Because right now, I think the narrative is my plate's full. I don't have time to add one more thing. And, the reframe of that is SEL is the plate, that we need to center the student. We need to center social and emotional learning in a space to engage our students.
Sure. I hear a lot of that from Sabria's comments as well about what teachers are still needing, what resources are still needed. Robin, would you take the last word?
I would love to connect with all of you to get a playlist of opera, of music that helps people lift their spirits and helps people stay where they want to stay when they're feeling sad and any other kind of emotion. And in fact, would map on a playlist that would map on to the mood meter, where we talk about feelings. There are different families there, and there's the mood meter. Thank you. So the red family of feelings, anger and anxiety, and the blue family, sadness and loneliness, and then the more pleasant feelings in green and yellow. So we've had students develop their own playlist, but I would love to hear your playlist. And
okay, Robin, you asked for it.
I was going to say, Patrick, I think we can make that happen.
Oh yeah. I hope you have a lot of time. Yeah.
Right.
I think it's great. And just bringing music more into the teaching and learning, social and emotional learning, I think is where some of the academics can take a lesson from you.
It's been a deep part of HGOCO's work from the beginning, and it remains so. Using music in exactly this way. This intersects with so much of our work, and our one of our favorite things at HGO is when we engage in some of these programs through HGOCO, and people say, "Oh, I didn't know that was opera," or "I didn't know that was classical music." There's always there's a narrow definition of what that is in a lot of the culture now, and so by doing this kind of work, we help expand that for people. These are expansive ideas, not reductive ideas, and I love that. You are three incredible guests, Robin, Sabria, Scott. Thank you so much for being here today and for enriching us with so many thoughts. And I found it very, very inspiring to get to know some of the work that you're doing, and it's incredibly important work. Thank you so much.
And I want to just take this time to just say how honored it is to be sharing this space with such incredible movers and shakers in our education system, and making the connections for our audience and for me, for everyone in the room, on how music can really play a role in everyone's lives in such a challenging time. So I hope you enjoyed the session as much as I have. We're so happy that you are here with us watching. We invite you to join us for our next month's episode when we discuss vocal health. If you haven't already, please subscribe to our HGO YouTube channel, like us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, do all of the good things so you don't miss out on these opportunities the next time they come around. For any more information, you can always go check out our website at hgo.org. Have a wonderful day, everyone.